All right, everyone, here we are. This is the official announcement. FFG's stream had ended quite a little bit ago, and here are the new suspensions. And I think this is probably the thing that does the most to change everything. We've got Django suspended, Triple Dark Raid suspended, and DJ suspended. So this is definitely on the end of, wow, I'm kind of surprised they ended up suspending all of these cards. I would have expected Triple Dark Raid and Django, to be honest. DJ was the one question mark I had. DJ is one of those ones that is super annoying, and I think that's really the main reason as to why they ended up banning DJ or suspending it. I say ban, it's suspended. It's like the same thing. I don't know why they're so hung up on the suspended word, to be honest. So if I say ban, I apologize. I intend suspend, but this is honestly really interesting. Honestly, really interesting. Because first off, let's talk about Django. Django was a big problem. Everyone knew it. We talked about Triple Dark Raid being banned. They didn't want to ban Django, or a lot of people didn't want to ban Django just because it removes the leader from the pool, right? Obviously, that's kind of unfortunate. But with Django being gone, you open up a ton of options. People talked about Triple Dark Raid maybe being a solution to banning out Django Red and the space decks that you got. But Django probably still would have existed in some form. And I will say Django as a leader in of itself is a very annoying leader. One of the biggest things about Star Wars Unlimited is this back and forth action, right? And with that, obviously attacking with units is one of those actions you can take. Well, with Django, it really made it one-sided. It was like, okay, I attack, and then you can't because I exhausted your unit while attacking with mine or while playing my action, right? It was like, all together. I play my unit, I exhaust yours. I attack, I exhaust your unit. That can be really, really rough. So a lot of the aggro decks, or the decks that were relying on being a little bit more aggressive with a lot of unit-based strategies, were really struggling. And one of those decks that I was really curious about was Kazuda. Kazuda is a very big unit-based deck that requires you to attack oftentimes, especially with Kazuda himself, because if you don't get the attack in with Kazuda, you no longer can remove those negative abilities, right? Things like the Millennium Falcon or the Contracted Hunter or whatever you're using, which is a huge downside. So I think those types of decks are really going to have an opportunity to play, which is really, really nice. Now, here's the thing. All those decks may not be the meta that people want to see because they're a little bit more aggressive and definitely going to shift the meta, I think, towards more aggression, just because, not the aspect, but in terms of the deck archetype, because one of the decks that was really good against Django was more controlling decks. And yes, Django could beat the controlling decks, but there was a severe disadvantage for Django just in the stats that we saw. So I think control decks are actually going to be hit pretty hard, but they don't want control decks to be meta. So a lot more mid-range is something that I think can be opened up, and a lot more aggressive decks. One of the things is aggro decks can almost always beat every deck in the meta, which is what makes them so strong, is because you can just go so fast. Now, with the more kind of like tempo aggro decks, sort of like Django, really what gets pushed out of the meta is these mid-range styles. These styles that are a little bit slower, a little bit more value-oriented, especially with decks that are playing, for example, I think of a perfect mid-range card is like Kanan. Decently statted unit, a little bit above stat in terms of most other units, gets a little bit of heal, a little bit of value on attack. Those types of cards are just impossible to play in a meta with Django. So I think Django being banned makes a ton of sense. I don't think anyone saw this being a surprise. I had mentioned that, yeah, Django's going to probably be banned as soon as we saw those first tournaments. Even before that, I considered Django probably to be a card that we're going to be looking out for to probably not stay in the meta for very long. Triple Dark Raid is the next card up, and Triple Dark Raid, this also makes a lot of sense. Now, when people were saying, okay, if you ban Django, do you need to ban Triple Dark Raid? I think you still do. I actually think Boba 4 with Triple Dark Raid is incredibly strong. And without Django being one of its bad matchups, because Django was a bad matchup for Boba 4 usually, you were really, really probably going to be in a dominant spot. I think Boba 4 would have risen up probably to be one of the better decks in the format. It's already performing pretty well with Triple Dark Raid as one of the main usages, especially without a bunch of Djangos running around. The indirect damage also works really well against control strategies, so it actually works better oftentimes against those control decks. Like if you play a Fet's Fire Spray, the small version, suddenly you're dealing 2 damage to their base when it comes down, and on attack you're dealing 6. That's way stronger than like an IG-2000 from Django, right? You get immediate impact. That can be really strong. So Triple Dark Raid's going to harm that. It's also going to harm Major Von Reg, which was another deck that was using it. But outside of that, I don't really think it's going to change up all that much. Triple Dark Raid really was for Django and for Boba, at least in the current iterations. But I do think the card was so strong that it was probably worth a ban. It probably was. Because it really changes every single vehicle going forward and really warps the ability to kind of play those cards because of the resource cost reduction and the ability to immediately ready units up. I think this is just one of those cards where it just felt a little unfair, right? The fact that you got to immediately attack with it, the fact that you got to cheat on cost with it, and the fact that you didn't have to have a card in hand when you played it was just too powerful across the board. If you compare it to something like now there are two of them, which gets a resource cost reduction, but you have to have the card in hand, you have to have a share of trades, and you still have to go ahead and, actually play the event, like, it's significantly different. Now, obviously, it doesn't return to your hand at the end of turn, but actually in a lot of the decks, the Triple Dark Raid decks, returning to your hand ends up being, well, a bonus in some cases, like Ruthless Raider, Devastator, etc. So not surprised, Triple Dark Raid. Now DJ is really interesting, and this is, to me, the most interesting one. Yes, Django, yes, Triple Dark Raid, yes, it's going to shake up the meta because Django was pretty dominant. But for a long, long time, Han 1 has been a dominant force. Han 1 from set 1, set 2, into set 3. Set 2 and set 3, he was a really, really big contender. And double yellow Han alongside like Han Green was one of the reasons why. And DJ was a major component of that. Now, I think when you ban DJ, Han Yellow still is going to be an existing deck. I think it'll still be like a top 10 list, to be honest. It doesn't really change a lot of the games with Han Yellow because Tech DJ, yes, it's a good combination, but it doesn't happen every game. And even if it doesn't, DJ itself wasn't a card you wanted to play every game. Now, you're going to get a lot worse of matchups against control decks because DJ is one of those cards that really worked well against those. But with Django being the number one deck by far, and then Han 1 being maybe a top 5 list, definitely getting a nerf, who's going to reign at the top? Is it going to be Quinlan? I think there's a chance. Is it going to be Cad Red? I think there's going to be a chance. But again, the lists that we haven't seen that are really going to struggle up against Django and also probably struggle against Han Yellow as well, they're going to have a chance to actually introduce themselves into the meta. Kazuda, as I said, is like a perfect example of a list that I'm really interested in seeing if anyone's going to take a chance on them and see if they can actually perform well. I am really hoping that this breathes a lot of life into the competitive scene because I'm going to be honest, even though I love the game and I don't necessarily play competitively in paper, but I do play, not like competitively, but I am a competitive person online. So yes, I do try to win and things like that. But watching the games, I was getting bored. I'm like, oh, it's a Django v Django matchup. I really don't care to watch that. And it was happening a lot. So even just from a spectator perspective, I am excited to see what's going to be happening for the next tournaments. Right, this is going to be the time when we get to see a ton of mix-up because we just got a new set. It's still pretty fresh, less than a month old, and we just got number 1 and like number 2 or 3 or 4, wherever you place Han Yellow. Basically, their key components or just the decks themselves completely banned, right? So that's huge. So I cannot wait to see what's going to happen, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. Was this a good decision by FFG? And actually, I want to mention that here before we close out the video. This is a really good sign from FFG. As much as you could say, oh, Triple Dark Raid was a mistake, DJ was a mistake, the fact that they're listening to player feedback and hearing, oh, DJ is really annoying, we don't want to play him against him anymore, and it's pretty oppressive when it does happen. And then Django and Triple Dark Raid, the stats are supporting us, guys. This deck is insanely disgusting. Can you please do something about it? And they did, and pretty quickly as well, right? Pretty quickly, especially since we just started seeing Django pop up in the first 2 weeks of the meta tournaments, right? So in 2 weeks, we got a ban on Django in terms of him being oppressive, right? So really awesome stuff. And I do think that warrants some props to FFG, especially since their testing included things like Boba Fett and everything like that. Like all the cards that they're banning right now, all the sets that are testing are going to be including these cards. So when they're looking back and they're just making changes based on what they're seeing and the testing hours that we get to put in because we're such a massive community comparatively to FFG, I just want to say a big props to FFG. I think they made the right decision and I'm all for it. Even though, obviously, you don't want it to happen in the first place, I think this is a great resolution so far, and I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are and what's going to happen in the meta. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.